The alien commander's voice boomed through the metallic chamber, cold and resonant, like the sound of steel scraping against glass. Humans Xifron began, his translucent, angular form towering over the group of captives. His pale blue skin shimmered under the sterile light of the Krexxar battleship, his elongated fingers gesturing with deliberate precision. Your kind's resistance was predictable but ultimately futile. Your communications are silenced, your defenses dismantled. Your planet belongs to us. Jack McAllister shifted uncomfortably and the restraints clamped around his wrists. His beer belly pressed against the rigid metallic vest the aliens had slapped on him, and his plaid shirt ripped and stained from the chaos hung loose over his jeans. He glanced at the other captives, all jittery and silent, their eyes darting between Sci-Fi and the holographic panels lining the walls. Jack sighed, muttering, "This guy's got the personality of a wet sock." Sci-Fi continued, pacing in front of the humans like a galactic overlord delivering a rehearsed monologue. "You are a primitive species clinging to your fragile existence, wielding sticks against forces you cannot comprehend. But fear not, the Krexxar will grant you the mercy of annihilation. Your eradication will pave the way for a superior." "Oh, come on," Jack interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is this your first day on the job, or do all you aliens practice these recycled villain monologues in front of a mirror?" The chamber fell silent. The captives froze, their eyes widening in disbelief as they turned to Jack. Even Sci-Fi stopped mid-step, his luminous eyes narrowing. Slowly, he turned his head toward Jack, who leaned back casually against the wall, his restraints clanking noisily. "Who dares mock the Krexxar?" as Sci-Fi hissed, his voice sharp with indignation. "That'd be me," Jack said, raising a hand as far as his restraints allowed. Jack McAllister, Midwesterner. Professional bowler, amateur beer enthusiast, and apparently the only guy here willing to say what everyone's thinking. A murmur rippled through the group of humans, a mix of nervous chuckles and suppressed panic. Sci-Fi stalked toward Jack, his towering frame casting a long shadow. "You find this amusing, human?" Amusing? Jack tilted his head, pretending to consider. "No, not really. I mean, you're kind of hitting all the cliches, primitive species, superior beings, the mercy of annihilation. You're like a bad sci-fi channel reject. Got any other tricks, or is this it?" Sci-Fi's translucent face turned a deeper shade of blue, a clear sign of irritation. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned a holographic display from the wall. Alien symbols and diagrams hovered in the air, incomprehensible to the humans but clearly important to the Krexxar. "Mock me all you wish," Sci-Fi snarled. "Soon you will witness the end of your world. The Krexxar possess a weapon of unimaginable power, one that will strip your planet's atmosphere and leave it a barren wasteland." The hologram shifted to display a sleek, oblong device glowing ominously. The humans gasped, and even Jack raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's a bit excessive," he muttered. "Couldn't just send a strongly worded email." Sci-Fi ignored him and turned to his subordinates. "Prepare the weapon for activation. Let them witness their inferiority firsthand." The Krexxar soldiers, smaller and less imposing than their commander but equally alien in appearance, moved to a console near the far end of the chamber. Their long, spindly fingers danced across glowing panels, the alien symbols shifting and pulsating as they worked. Jack squinted at the console, watching the patterns of light and movement. It was sleek, high-tech, and utterly foreign to him. But something about the way the lights pulsed in rhythm caught his attention. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like he was looking at a control panel for something specific, something important. As Sci-Fi continued his grandstanding, Jack leaned toward the guy next to him, a wiry fellow in a tattered business suit. "Hey," Jack whispered, "you see that console over there?" The man glanced nervously toward the Krexxar soldiers. "Yeah, what about it?" Jack smirked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "I think that's our ticket out of here." "What are you talking about?" the man hissed. "You're crazy. There's no way." "Relax," Jack interrupted, his grin widening. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he raised his voice and said, "Hold my beer." The room went completely still. Sci-Fi froze mid-sentence, his luminous eyes narrowing as he turned back to Jack. "What does this mean, hold my beer?" Jack straightened up, the restraints around his wrists creaking slightly. "It means you're about to see something you won't believe." Jack's flippant remark had the intended effect. The Krexxar commander's expression twisted into what Jack could only guess was confusion. though it was hard to read the face of an alien who looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a coat hanger. Sifron's composure cracked for a split second before he barked an order in his guttural language. Two Krexxar guards flanked Jack in an instant, their spindly frames belying their intimidating strength as they roughly yanked him upright. Finally, an audience Jack muttered under his breath as they clamped his arms tighter and dragged him to the center of the chamber. The other captives watched in a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Even Sarah Hayes, the dark-haired woman with grease-stained sleeves sitting a few feet away, seemed unable to take her eyes off the unfolding scene. Jack met her gaze and gave her a wink, as if to say, "Don't worry, I've got this." She furrowed her brow in a way that screamed, "You're insane." Jack couldn't argue with that. Sci-Fi loomed closer, his translucent body shimmering faintly. "You speak as though you have some grand strategy, human. But your insolence will achieve nothing. Restrain him fully. Let him see what his defiance brings." Great, Jack said brightly, feigning enthusiasm as the guards pushed him to his knees. "Front row seats. I always knew I'd get VIP treatment someday." While the guards tightened the restraints on Jack's wrists, he felt the faintest give in the mechanism. It wasn't much, just a soft click when he applied pressure at a sharp angle, but it was enough to catch his interest. He focused on the sensation, testing the restraint's weak point with deliberate movements, all while keeping up his stream of chatter. "Hey, Sci-Fi," he said conversationally. "Do you guys ever just, sit down and talk about your feelings? Maybe that's why you're always blowing up planets. Something unresolved in, what was it? The tendril region." The guards hissed something in their language, but Sci-Fi raised a hand to silence them. His glowing eyes bore into Jack with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "Your attempts to distract us are as pathetic as your species' technology. Observe what true power looks like." With a flourish, Sci-Fi gestured toward the console across the room. The Krexxar soldiers operating it stepped aside as the holographic display shifted to show Earth. The image zoomed in on a small, uninhabited island in the middle of the Pacific. It was lush, green, and utterly peaceful, a stark contrast to what was about to happen. A beam of light shot down from the Krexxar ship, piercing the atmosphere with surgical precision. For a brief moment, the island glowed brilliantly, almost like a second sun. Then, without so much as a sound, it vanished. No explosion, no debris, just a sudden, eerie absence where it had once been. The humans gasped in unison. Even Sarah, who had been quietly studying the room with sharp, calculating eyes, froze at the sight. Jack, however, raised an eyebrow and let out a low whistle. "Well, that's one way to cancel a beach vacation," he quipped. "But honestly, Sci-Fi, a little over the top, don't you think? What's next? Turning the moon into a disco ball?" Sci-Fi's patience snapped. "Enough. Silence this fool," he roared, his voice reverberating through the chamber. As the guards moved to gag him, Jack made his move. The weak point in the restraints had been gnawed at just enough. With a quick, sharp twist of his wrists, he felt the mechanism crack. The restraint shattered, falling to the floor with a clang. Before the guards could react, Jack dropped low, sweeping their legs out from under them in one fluid motion. "Showtime," he muttered, snatching one of their weapons, a sleek, glowing rod that hummed ominously. He had no idea how to use it, but improvisation was kind of his thing. Chaos erupted. The other Krexxar guards surged toward him, but Jack was already on the move. He darted towards Sarah, tossing her the weapon he'd grabbed. "Think you can work with this?" he called. Her skepticism melted into determination as she caught it mid-air. "I'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady despite the pandemonium. Jack knelt beside her and quickly snapped the restraints off her wrists. "Sarah, right? You look like you've got a brain. I need you to help me blow this place to kingdom come." She stared at him for a beat, then nodded. "What's the plan?" "You're an engineer, yeah? I saw some kind of power junction on the way in. You think you can sabotage it?" "I'll need tools," she said, scanning the room. Jack gestured at the Krexxar guards. "They've got plenty. Help yourself." As Sarah dashed toward the nearest guard, Jack turned his attention back to the console he'd been eyeing earlier. It was heavily guarded, but he didn't have time to second-guess himself. He sprinted across the room, ducking and weaving as energy blasts zipped past him. One missed him by inches, scorching the floor where he'd just been. "Nice aim," he shouted over his shoulder. "You guys ever think about glasses?" Reaching the console, Jack dropped to his knees and slid into cover behind it. The Krexxar soldiers guarding it turned, only to find themselves disarmed by Sarah, who had used her makeshift weapon with surprising efficiency. She tossed Jack a quick salute before disappearing into one of the side corridors, presumably to find the power junction. Jack turned his attention to the console. The alien glyphs were incomprehensible, but the interface itself was eerily familiar, almost like the experimental tech he used to work on at NASA. The memory of those late nights in the lab, surrounded by cutting-edge prototypes and half-finished schematics, came flooding back. He might not understand the Krexxar language, but circuits and energy flows? Those were universal. As he started pressing symbols and toggling switches, a voice crackled to life behind him. "You've got guts, McAllister, I'll give you that." He glanced over his shoulder to see Zyphron, his glowing body practically vibrating with fury. "But guts won't save you." Jack smirked, his fingers flying across the console. "Maybe not, but they make for great stories." Jack's eyes darted frantically between the glowing alien glyphs on the console and the Krexxar soldiers regrouping across the room. His adrenaline-soaked brain was piecing things together faster than he thought possible, but not fast enough to ignore the sound of Zyphron's heavy footfalls approaching. "You're out of your depth, human," Zyphron sneered, his voice low and venomous. "Do you honestly think tinkering with a system far beyond your comprehension will?" "Hold my beer," Jack snapped, cutting him off as he pressed a string of symbols that looked promising. A low hum reverberated through the deck, and the holographic display flickered. Jack wasn't entirely sure what he'd just done, but it felt important. He shot Zyphron a cocky grin over his shoulder. "You're gonna love this next bit." The hum shifted into a high-pitched whine, the kind that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stand up. He returned his focus to the console, trying not to think about the fact that, if this was anything like the tech he'd worked on back home, the noise meant something was seriously destabilizing. Perfect. That's what he needed. "Stop him," Zyphron bellowed. Krexxar soldiers surged forward, their weapons raised, but the ship suddenly lurched violently, sending everyone stumbling. Sparks erupted from a panel on the far wall, and the lights dimmed, plunging the room into chaotic flashes of red emergency lighting. "Would you look at that?" Jack said to no one in particular, his fingers still dancing across the console. "Guess your fancy superior tech isn't idiot-proof after all." McAllister, Sarah's voice crackled through a nearby intercom. Jack's head snapped toward it in surprise. "What the hell are you doing? The power core's in a feedback loop, it's gonna blow." "Working on it," Jack yelled back, slamming his palm onto a larger button that looked vaguely important. The console spat out a series of alien alerts, none of which he understood, but the display now showed the weapon module's outline flashing erratically. "You're not the only one who knows how to break stuff, Sarah. You break it anymore, and we won't live long enough to celebrate," she shot back. "Listen, you've got to eject the entire module before the core overloads. It's the only way to stop the chain reaction." Jack glanced at Zyphron, who was staggering back to his feet, his expression twisted with fury. "Uh-huh," Jack muttered, swiping at the holographic display. "And how exactly do I do that?" Sarah's response was instantaneous. "There's a secondary release mechanism. It should be on the main console, bottom right quadrant. Look for." "Found it," Jack interrupted, spotting a cluster of symbols that matched her description. He reached for them, but Zyphron lunged forward, grabbing Jack by the collar and yanking him away from the console. "You insolent worm," Zyphron roared, his grip crushing. "You dare sabotage my ship." Jack coughed, struggling against the alien's strength. "Sabotage," he wheezed, smirking despite the pressure on his throat. "Buddy, this is barely a tune-up." With a surge of effort, Jack twisted, using the momentum to slam his elbow into an exposed part of Zyphron's torso. The alien staggered back just enough for Jack to break free and dive back toward the console. His fingers mashed the glowing symbols Sarah had described. The ship shuddered violently and alarms blared at deafening volumes. The Krexxar soldiers hesitated, their guttural shouts barely audible over the cacophony. On the holographic display, the weapon module detached from the rest of the ship, a glowing dot drifting away as warning indicators flashed across the screen. "Jack, you did it," Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, relief evident. "The module's ejected, it's venting the core into space. You've got about 30 seconds before it blows." Jack let out a shaky laugh, slumping against the console. 30 seconds? Plenty of time for a coffee break. "Move," Sarah shouted, and Jack didn't need to be told twice. He bolted toward the exit, narrowly avoiding a Krexxar soldier who lunged for him. The ship lurched again, and Jack stumbled, grabbing onto a railing to steady himself. The corridor was chaos. Krexxar soldiers barked orders in their guttural language, their movements frantic as systems malfunctioned around them. Panels sparked, lights flickered, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning circuits. Jack ducked into a side passage, hoping to avoid the worst of the chaos. "Jack, where are you?" Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece. "No idea," he yelled back, skidding to a halt at a junction. "This place is a maze of doom and bad lighting." "Head for the maintenance base," she instructed. "I'm almost there. We've got an escape plan, just try not to get killed before you find it." "Noted," Jack muttered, picking a direction at random and sprinting down the corridor. A group of Krexxar soldiers rounded the corner ahead of him, their weapons raised. Jack swore under his breath and dove into a ventilation shaft, the cramped space barely wide enough for his shoulders. The shaft rattled as the ship continued to shudder around him. Jack crawled as fast as he could, his palms slick with sweat. He could hear the muffled voices of the Krexxar soldiers below, their guttural tones growing more frantic. They had bigger problems than him now, not that it made him feel any safer. After what felt like an eternity, Jack emerged into the maintenance bay, dropping down onto the grated floor with a clang. Sarah was there, crouched behind a stack of crates with a makeshift control panel in her hands. "Took you long enough," she said, not looking up from her work. "Nice to see you too," Jack shot back, jogging over to her. "What's the plan?" She gestured toward a small, sleek shuttle docked at the far end of the bay. "That's our ride. I've overridden the locks, but we've got about 10 seconds before this whole place goes up in flames." "Perfect," Jack said, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the shuttle. "Let's not waste any of them." They sprinted across the bay as the alarms reached a fever pitch. The shuttle's hatch hissed open, and they scrambled inside. Jack slapped the controls and the ship roared to life, the thrusters firing just as the Krexxar battleship behind them erupted in a blinding explosion. The force of the blast sent the shuttle spinning, and Jack gripped the controls, fighting to stabilize it. Sarah leaned over, her hands flying over the auxiliary systems. Together, they managed to right the ship, the stars settling into a calm expanse outside the viewport. Jack leaned back in his seat, his chest heaving. "Tell me we're not dead." "We're not dead," Sarah confirmed, though her voice was shaky. "You actually pulled it off." Jack let out a breathless laugh, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "Not bad for a guy who failed out of flight school, huh?" Sarah gave him a look, equal parts exasperation and admiration. "Don't push your luck, McAllister." Jack grinned, settling into the pilot's chair. "Luck's kind of my thing." The Krexxar ship groaned as its systems failed one by one, the explosion of the ejected weapon module sending shockwaves through its core. Alarms blared in panicked tones, and the red emergency lights cut through clouds of acrid smoke that billowed through the corridors. Zyphron staggered to his feet, his glowing form dimmer now, his movements jerky as if the ship's instability had begun to affect even him. Jack and Sarah's stolen shuttle zipped through the wreckage-filled void, weaving past chunks of Krexxar hull that spiraled aimlessly in zero gravity. The viewport offered a clear view of Earth as the blue and green orbs slowly came back into focus amidst the chaos. Jack leaned back in the pilot's seat, his expression one of exhausted triumph. "Would you look at that?" he said, gesturing at the planet with one hand while the other barely held the shuttle's wobbly controls. "Still in one piece. You're welcome, Earth." Sarah, seated in the co-pilot's chair, shot him a sidelong glance. Her face was streaked with soot and sweat, her dark hair disheveled, but her sharp eyes sparkled with something between relief and disbelief. "You do realize we're not out of this yet, right?" Jack waved her off. "Details. The big bad ship is basically a floating pile of junk now. We've got front row seats to humanity's first interstellar upset victory." A spark shot out of the shuttle's control panel, and Sarah immediately leaned forward, yanking open a panel to reroute power. "Maybe save the victory lap for after we land," she muttered, her fingers working quickly. "This thing's held together by duct tape and alien hubris." Jack smirked, tapping the side of the panel as if to reassure it. "She's got character. Just needs a little TLC." "Jack, focus," Sarah snapped. "The Krexxar might be disoriented, but they're not just going to let us waltz away. If they regroup." Yeah, regroup? Revenge, whatever, Jack interrupted, adjusting their course. Relax, I've got this. As if on cue, a warning light blinked furiously on the console. Jack frowned, tapping it with his finger like it might change its mind. Is that one of those friendly alarms, or? Sarah's eyes narrowed as she scanned the readout. Not friendly. They're trying to lock onto us. Jack groaned. Of course they are. Can't just let us fly off into the sunset, huh? He yanked the controls hard to the left, sending the shuttle into a steep dive that narrowly dodged a salvo of energy blasts from the Krexxar ship. The blasts sailed past them, illuminating the dark void like streaks of angry lightning. Okay, that's not great, Jack muttered, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the controls. Any chance you've got a trick up your sleeve? Sarah's hands flew across the auxiliary console, her brow furrowed in concentration. I might be able to override their targeting systems, but it's risky. I'll need a few minutes. Jack barked a laugh, the sound more strained than amused. Minutes, huh? Plenty of time. I'll just keep dodging death lasers, no big deal. The Krexxar ship, though crippled, still loomed menacingly in the distance. Its shields were flickering erratically, and its weapons systems were sluggish, but it still had enough firepower to make their escape a dicey proposition. Jack swerved the shuttle again, narrowly avoiding another blast that skimmed so close it rattled the entire craft. You sure you don't want to take the wheel? He called over his shoulder. I'm starting to think I missed my calling as an intergalactic stunt pilot. Sarah didn't respond, too focused on her work. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, and Jack couldn't help but marvel at her calm under pressure. It was rare to meet someone who could match his improvisational chaos with methodical precision. Got it, Sarah finally exclaimed, her voice triumphant. She slammed a final sequence of commands into the console, and the Krexxar ship's weapon system suddenly went dark. Jack blinked. Did you just? Scrambled their targeting algorithm, Sarah explained, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. They won't be shooting anything for a while. Jack let out a low whistle. Remind me to never get on your bad side. The shuttle sped away from the floundering Krexxar vessel, leaving it spinning helplessly in Earth's orbit. Jack and Sarah exchanged relieved glances but said nothing, the weight of what they'd just survived settling over them. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the shuttle's engines and the faint crackle of static from the comm system. Then, an all-too-familiar voice cut through the silence. Humans, Sci-Fi growled, his tone low and venomous. You may think you've won, but this is far from over. Jack rolled his eyes, leaning toward the comms panel. Oh, give it a rest, X-Fi. You've already lost. Maybe take this as a sign to reevaluate your life choices. Sci-Fi's image appeared on a small display screen, his translucent form flickering with static. His glowing eyes burned with anger, but there was an edge of something else there too, frustration maybe, or even fear. You are unlike any species we have encountered, he admitted grudgingly. Your recklessness, your defiance. It defies logic. Jack grinned, crossing his arms. Yeah, we get that a lot. Humanity's kind of an acquired taste. Sci-Fi's gaze shifted to Sarah, who stared back at him with steely resolve. You may have delayed the inevitable, Sci-Fi said, his tone softening ever so slightly. But the Krexxar will not forget this humiliation. Good, Sarah shot back. Because neither will we. Sci-Fi's image flickered and vanished, leaving nothing but static. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and slumped back in his seat. Well, that was dramatic, he said. Think he'll send us a thank you card. Sarah smirked, shaking her head. Doubt it. But if we're lucky, they'll think twice before trying this again. Jack glanced out the viewport, watching Earth grow larger as they descended through the atmosphere. The planet shimmered like a beacon of hope, untouched despite the chaos that had unfolded above it. Not bad for a day's work, he muttered. Then, turning to Sarah with a grin, he added, so how does saving the world rank on your to-do list? She chuckled, the sound light and genuine despite the exhaustion in her voice. Somewhere between fixing an old carburetor and making my mom's lasagna recipe. Jack laughed, the tension finally breaking. Well, I don't know about you, but I could use a drink. Preferably something stronger than alien engine fumes. Sarah smiled, the expression softening her usually serious demeanor. You've earned it, McAllister. Just don't let it go to your head. As the shuttle broke through the clouds, the scorched surface of Earth's cities came into view. Fires smoldered in patches of ruin, but already humans were pouring into the streets, cheering as they saw the Krexxar ship retreating into the distance. Jack and Sarah watched the scene unfold in silence, their shared exhaustion giving way to a deep, unspoken sense of accomplishment. "Think they'll call us heroes?" Jack asked after a while, his tone light. Sarah glanced at him, her smile returning. "Probably. But you'll just tell them you didn't want to share your beer." Jack grinned. "Exactly." The shuttle touched down amidst a crowd of cheering survivors, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack allowed himself to relax. Earth was safe, at least for now, and humanity had proven itself in ways no one could have expected. As the Krexxar licked their wounds in the cold expanse of space, Jack leaned against the shuttle, a bottle of beer in hand, and watched as humanity began to rebuild.